Hi, Pastor Jason here, coming to you on the Day of Atonement. This day remembers that God deals with sin and that God will not ignore sin. The Jewish people in the Old Testament period would come to the altar when they realized they had committed a sin, when they were guilty of something. And they would bring an offering, a sacrifice, something that cost them something. And they would bring that to the altar as a sacrifice, remembering that sin is not something that can be ignored, that God will deal with sin. And their sacrifice would atone for them. Their guilt would be removed in the eyes of the Lord. And interestingly, Scripture says it would be rolled onto the altar. The altar became sort of a symbolic repository of the confessed sins of the people. And so once a year on this day, on the Day of Atonement, the high priest would sacrifice a bull for his own sins so that he was clean and standing before the Lord. And then they would take 2 goats, one of which they would kill and they would sacrifice on the altar as a atonement for the altar itself. It would remove the guilt that was sitting on the altar before the Lord, and the confessed sins of the people would therefore be dealt with and removed. The other goat, they would confess the unknown sins of the people over, the things that they had not confessed and sought atonement through sacrifice. And then they would drive the goat away, and they would drive it into the wilderness, and in the later years of the temple period, drive it over a cliff to make sure that it didn't wander back into the village or into Jerusalem. And so these 2 goats symbolized God dealing with confessed sin through atonement and God dealing with unconfessed sin, driving it from his presence. If you go into the New Testament, we know that Jesus Christ is the final sacrifice for our sin. He died once and for all. So there's no longer a need for a goat on the Day of Atonement to cleanse the altar as a repository of sins. Jesus Christ took all of the sins of all of the people of God for all of time and did away with them once and for all when he died on the cross. The unconfessed sins of people will not be put over a goat and driven into the wilderness. There will come a time, in 2 Corinthians we're told that Jesus will defeat all of his enemies, and the last enemy to be destroyed is death itself. And you can see what happens in the book of Revelation in chapters 19 through 22 when God deals finally and formally with the unconfessed, unrepentant sin, where it is cast along with death and Hades and all people who have not repented before the Lord into the lake of fire. Much grander than driving a goat into the wilderness, Jesus drives the damned into hell. And this is, so atonement has always been a picture in microcosm of what God does finally with sin. And again, my encouragement to you is that your sin will be dealt with one of 2 ways, either through the death of Jesus Christ, or because you yourself will be driven from his presence. Which one will it be for you? God bless you.